There is a silent moment in life when you suddenly realize something deeply uncomfortable. Many people you trusted will not always stay. Many people you loved will not always understand. Many people you expected support from will not always be there. And slowly, life becomes quieter. Fewer messages, fewer conversations, fewer people who truly see your heart. At first, this silence feels painful. You feel something is missing. You feel like happiness has disappeared. But Buddhism teaches a profound truth. Being alone is not suffering. Depending on others for happiness is suffering. Because anything that depends on people can change. And when it changes, the mind begins to worry. What if I lose this? What if I am forgotten? What if I have no one? But what if happiness was never meant to come from outside? What if peace was always waiting within you? Today, we will discover 8 powerful lessons from Buddhist wisdom that will help you be happy even when you are completely alone. A happiness that does not disappear. A peace that does not depend on anyone. A strength that stays with you in every situation. 1. Happiness that depends on others always creates fear. Many people believe happiness comes from having people around them. They feel that if someone is always present, always available, always supportive, then life will feel complete. They think relationships create emotional safety and constant communication creates comfort. When messages arrive quickly, when attention is given regularly, and when others show care in ways we expect, the heart feels temporarily secure. This feeling creates the illusion that happiness is coming from outside sources. But this kind of happiness is fragile because it is dependent on conditions that are always changing. When happiness depends only on others, the mind slowly becomes anxious without realizing it. Deep inside, a silent fear begins to grow. There is fear that people may change, fear that priorities may shift, fear that someone who once gave time may become busy, fear that attention may reduce, fear that emotional support may not always be available. This fear often stays hidden, but it influences emotions in powerful ways. A person may appear calm on the surface, but internally they feel uncertain, restless, and emotionally dependent. The mind begins to worry about small changes in behavior. If someone replies late, the mind starts creating negative thoughts. If someone seems distant, the heart begins to feel insecure. If communication becomes less frequent, overthinking begins to increase. Small situations begin to create big emotional reactions. The problem is not the situation itself. The problem is the belief that happiness comes only from external connection. When the mind believes that peace depends on someone else's presence, emotional stability becomes weak. Buddhist wisdom teaches that anything that depends completely on external conditions cannot provide lasting peace. External situations are always changing. People have responsibilities, pressures, personal struggles, and changing priorities. Sometimes they are available, sometimes they are not. Sometimes they understand, sometimes they misunderstand. Sometimes they show care in ways we expect, and sometimes they do not. When happiness is connected only to external behavior, emotional balance becomes unstable because external conditions are never fully in our control. This does not mean relationships are not valuable. Relationships can provide support, comfort, and companionship. But when relationships become the only source of happiness, they also become the source of fear. The mind begins to hold tightly, trying to protect something that is naturally changing. The tighter the attachment becomes, the greater the fear of losing it. And when fear increases, peace decreases. A person who depends completely on others for emotional stability often feels restless when alone. Silence feels uncomfortable. Time without communication feels heavy. The absence of attention feels painful. The mind begins to believe that something is missing. But in reality, nothing is missing. The mind has simply become used to external stimulation as the primary source of comfort. When that stimulation is reduced, the mind feels empty because it has not yet learned to create peace internally. Inner happiness begins when we understand that emotional stability must come from within first. When the mind becomes familiar with its own presence, when a person learns to feel comfortable in silence, when peace is created through understanding rather than external reassurance, fear slowly begins to disappear. The heart no longer feels threatened by temporary distance or changing situations. Instead of feeling abandoned by silence, a person begins to feel calm within it. When happiness is created internally, relationships become healthier, because the connection is no longer based on emotional dependence, it is based on choice, understanding, and balance. A person who has inner peace does not panic when communication decreases. They do not feel insecure when attention shifts. They do not feel emotionally weak when they spend time alone. They remain stable because their foundation is strong. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace grows when attachment becomes balanced. It teaches that happiness should not be built on conditions that constantly change. True stability comes from understanding the nature of life. Everything moves, everything evolves, everything transforms. When we accept this truth, we stop trying to control every external situation. We stop expecting permanence from temporary conditions. As inner understanding increases, fear decreases. The mind becomes quieter, emotional reactions become softer. The need for constant reassurance becomes weaker. A person begins to feel peaceful not because everything outside is perfect, but because everything inside has become steady. This is the beginning of real happiness, a happiness that does not shake when circumstances change, a happiness that remains even when life becomes silent. 2. Learn to feel comfortable with yourself. One of the biggest reasons people struggle when they are alone is because they are not used to being with themselves. From a very young age, life becomes filled with noise, conversations, social interaction, responsibilities, and constant stimulation. The mind becomes addicted to distraction. There is always something to watch, someone to talk to, or somewhere to go. Because of this constant external engagement, many people never truly learn how to sit quietly with their own thoughts. When the distractions suddenly reduce, the silence begins to feel uncomfortable. A person may feel restless without knowing why. They may feel the urge to check their phone repeatedly, search for something to watch, or try to contact someone just to avoid feeling alone. This reaction does not happen because solitude is painful. It happens because the mind is unfamiliar with stillness. The mind has become used to escaping itself instead of understanding itself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that discomfort in solitude is often a sign that we have not yet built a peaceful relationship with our own mind. When a person feels uneasy in silence, it means the mind is constantly searching for external stimulation to feel stable. But true stability is not created by constant activity. True stability is created by becoming comfortable with your own presence. Learning to feel comfortable with yourself is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. When you begin to accept your own company, loneliness slowly transforms into calmness. Instead of feeling empty, you begin to feel spacious. Instead of feeling restless, you begin to feel relaxed. Instead of feeling bored, you begin to feel aware. Being comfortable with yourself means you are not afraid of your own thoughts. You are not trying to escape your own emotions. You are not constantly searching for someone to fill your time. You begin to understand that your presence is enough. This understanding creates emotional independence. When you become comfortable with yourself, you no longer feel desperate for constant communication. You no longer feel uncomfortable when there is nothing happening around you. You begin to appreciate quiet moments. Simple activities begin to feel meaningful. Sitting peacefully, reflecting calmly, and observing your thoughts without judgment becomes easier. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes peaceful when it stops constantly running away from itself. Many people fear silence because silence reveals thoughts that are usually hidden by noise. But these thoughts are not enemies. They are messages that help you understand yourself more deeply. When you observe your thoughts without reacting to them, clarity begins to appear. You begin to notice which thoughts create stress and which thoughts create peace. You begin to understand your emotional patterns. You begin to see how unnecessary worries disturb your mind. With this awareness, you gradually develop the ability to guide your thoughts instead of being controlled by them. As your relationship with yourself improves, your emotional strength increases. You stop feeling incomplete when alone because you no longer rely on external presence to feel stable. You begin to feel whole as you are. This feeling of wholeness creates quiet confidence. When a person enjoys their own company, relationships also become healthier because connection is no longer based on fear of loneliness. It is based on mutual understanding and emotional balance. You no longer expect others to fill every empty moment. You no longer feel dependent on constant attention. Solitude then becomes a place of restoration instead of isolation. It becomes a space where the mind can rest, a space where emotional tension can dissolve, a space where clarity can grow. Many of the greatest realizations in life appear when the mind becomes quiet enough to see clearly. When you feel comfortable with yourself, you discover that peace does not require constant activity. Peace does not require constant conversation. Peace does not require constant validation. Peace grows naturally when the mind feels safe within its own presence. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the person who learns to sit peacefully with themselves develops a strength that cannot easily be shaken by external circumstances, because their stability is not dependent on noise, distraction, or approval. Their stability comes from understanding their own mind. When you stop running away from yourself, you start discovering yourself. And when you discover yourself, you begin to realize that being alone does not mean being empty. Being alone can mean being deeply connected with your own peace. 3. Detach from the need to be constantly understood. One of the hidden causes of emotional exhaustion is the constant desire to be understood by everyone around us. Many people carry a silent expectation that others should naturally understand their intentions, their emotions, their struggles, and their perspective. When this expectation is not fulfilled, the heart begins to feel heavy. A person may feel ignored, misjudged, or unappreciated. Over time, this creates frustration, disappointment, and emotional fatigue. The truth is, every person sees life through their own experiences. Every individual has their own mindset, their own beliefs, their own emotional capacity, and their own level of awareness. Because of this, complete understanding from everyone is not always possible. Some people may understand you deeply, while others may never fully see what you feel inside. This does not mean your feelings are invalid. It simply means human perception is limited. Many people suffer not because they are alone, but because they feel misunderstood. They want someone to recognize their sincerity. They want someone to acknowledge their effort. They want someone to appreciate their intentions. When this recognition does not come, they begin to question themselves. They begin to over-explain their actions. They begin to seek reassurance again and again. This constant need to be understood slowly drains emotional energy. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the desire to be fully understood by everyone creates unnecessary suffering. The more we expect people to see everything from our perspective, the more we feel disappointed when they cannot. The mind begins to replay conversations, searching for ways to make others understand. It begins to create imaginary explanations, hoping that someone will finally see what we feel. But this cycle often leads to overthinking, not peace. When a person becomes too attached to being understood, they start depending on external agreement to feel emotionally stable. If someone supports them, they feel calm. If someone disagrees with them, they feel disturbed. Their emotional balance begins to depend on how others interpret them. This creates instability because opinions are always changing. People see situations differently, and not everyone will interpret your actions in the same way. Detaching from the need to be constantly understood does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means accepting that not everyone will fully see your heart, and that is okay. Your peace should not depend on how others interpret you. When you know your intentions are sincere, you do not need constant approval. When you know your actions are honest, you do not need constant validation. Many times, the need to be understood comes from the fear of being judged. People worry that misunderstanding will lead to rejection or criticism. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us that trying to control every opinion is impossible. No matter how clearly you explain yourself, some people will still misunderstand. No matter how kind you are, some people may still misinterpret your actions. Freedom begins when you accept this reality. You begin to speak honestly without feeling the need to defend every detail. You begin to act sincerely without worrying about every opinion. You begin to live authentically without constantly explaining your choices. This creates emotional relief because your mind is no longer trapped in the cycle of justification. When you detach from the need to be constantly understood, your communication becomes calmer. You speak when necessary, but you do not feel pressured to convince everyone. You explain when appropriate, but you do not exhaust yourself trying to correct every misunderstanding. You begin to choose peace over constant explanation. Buddhism teaches that inner clarity is more important than external agreement. When you understand yourself clearly, confusion from others loses its power. When your intentions are aligned with your values, criticism feels less threatening. When your mind is calm, misunderstanding does not create emotional chaos. This lesson also protects your energy. Constantly trying to make others understand every thought and every emotion consumes mental strength. It creates tension in conversations. It creates anxiety about how you are perceived. But when you accept that understanding cannot always be forced, your mind becomes lighter. You begin to recognize that not every situation requires explanation. Not every opinion requires response. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Sometimes silence protects peace more than continuous explanation. Sometimes calm acceptance protects emotional balance more than endless clarification. As you practice this detachment, confidence begins to grow. You become less sensitive to misinterpretation. You become less reactive to disagreement. You become more focused on living truthfully rather than appearing perfect in the eyes of others. This shift creates stability because your sense of self no longer depends on external confirmation. Detaching from the need to be constantly understood also improves relationships. When you stop expecting complete understanding, you stop feeling easily hurt. You allow space for differences in perspective. You allow space for imperfect communication. You allow space for human limitation. This creates patience, and patience creates emotional maturity. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace increases when we release unnecessary mental pressure. Trying to control how everyone perceives you is a heavy burden. When this burden is released, emotional freedom becomes possible. You begin to live more naturally. You begin to speak more simply. You begin to think more calmly. You realize that being misunderstood does not reduce your value. It simply shows that every mind sees the world differently. True stability comes from knowing who you are, even when others do not fully see it. True peace comes from accepting yourself, even when others misunderstand your journey. When the need for constant understanding disappears, inner silence becomes comfortable. You no longer feel restless when someone disagrees with you. You no longer feel anxious when someone fails to see your intentions. You no longer feel pressured to constantly prove your sincerity. Instead, you feel grounded in your own awareness. You trust your intentions. You trust your growth. You trust your journey. This trust creates emotional independence, and emotional independence creates peace that is not easily disturbed by the opinions of others. 4. Seek peace, not attention. One of the most common reasons people feel emotionally tired is because they unknowingly begin to seek attention instead of peace. Attention can feel pleasant in the moment. When people notice you, respond to you quickly, appreciate you, or include you in their conversations, the mind feels satisfied for a short time. It creates a temporary feeling of importance. It makes you feel visible. It makes you feel valued. But the comfort that comes from attention is often unstable because attention is not something that can remain constant. People's focus changes, their responsibilities increase, their priorities shift, their lives become busy in ways we cannot always see or understand. When attention becomes less frequent, the mind may begin to feel uncomfortable. It starts asking questions that create emotional pressure. Why did they not respond? Why do they seem distant? Why do they not notice me like before? Why do I feel ignored? These thoughts slowly create inner tension. The mind begins to interpret silence as rejection, even when no rejection exists. Buddhist wisdom teaches that when peace depends on attention, emotional balance becomes fragile. Attention is influenced by circumstances, and circumstances are always changing. If your happiness increases only when you are noticed, then your happiness will also decrease when attention is reduced. This creates instability because your emotional state becomes controlled by factors outside your influence. The desire for attention often develops quietly. It may begin as a natural wish to feel appreciated. Every human being likes to feel valued. Every person wants to feel respected. But when this desire becomes too strong, it slowly transforms into dependence. A person begins to measure their worth by how much attention they receive. They begin to feel anxious when attention decreases. They begin to overthink when responses are delayed. They begin to question themselves when they are not noticed. The mind starts to believe that attention equals importance. It begins to think that being noticed means being valuable, and being ignored means being unimportant. But this belief is misleading. Your value does not increase or decrease based on how much attention you receive. Your value exists independently of recognition. Attention may come and go, but your inner worth does not disappear simply because someone did not notice you at a particular moment. Buddhism teaches that peace is more valuable than attention because peace creates stability. Attention stimulates the ego, but peace strengthens the mind. Attention often creates comparison. The mind begins to compare how much attention others receive and how much attention it receives. Comparison leads to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction leads to restlessness. Restlessness disturbs inner calm. When a person seeks peace instead of attention, emotional pressure begins to decrease. They no longer feel disturbed when someone does not immediately respond. They no longer feel anxious when they are not the center of focus. They no longer feel the need to constantly prove their importance. Instead, they begin to focus on maintaining a calm and balanced state of mind. Seeking peace means prioritizing emotional stability over temporary validation. It means understanding that constant recognition is not necessary for a meaningful life. It means realizing that quiet growth is often more powerful than visible approval. Many of the most meaningful changes in life happen silently. Inner strength develops quietly. Emotional maturity grows gradually. Clarity appears slowly. When attention becomes less important, a person begins to feel more relaxed. Conversations feel natural rather than forced. Actions become sincere rather than performed for approval. Silence becomes comfortable instead of uncomfortable. The need to constantly impress others begins to disappear. This creates authenticity because behavior is no longer driven by the desire to be noticed. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the more a person chases attention, the more restless the mind becomes. The mind keeps searching for signs of recognition. It keeps looking for reassurance. It keeps checking whether others are responding positively. This constant searching prevents the mind from resting. Even when attention is received, the satisfaction does not last long. The mind soon begins to search again. This cycle creates emotional exhaustion. Peace, on the other hand, does not require constant stimulation. Peace allows the mind to settle. Peace allows thoughts to slow down. Peace allows emotions to stabilize. When peace becomes the priority, the mind stops constantly scanning for approval. It stops measuring self-worth through reactions from others. It begins to feel complete without needing constant acknowledgement. Seeking peace also helps protect emotional energy. Many people lose energy trying to maintain an image that attracts attention. They feel pressure to always appear interesting, always appear strong, always appear happy. But maintaining an image requires effort. It creates tension because the person feels responsible for how others perceive them. This pressure gradually becomes tiring. When peace becomes more important than attention, this pressure decreases. A person begins to act naturally instead of performing for approval. They become less concerned about being constantly noticed. They become more focused on feeling internally balanced. This shift creates freedom because the mind no longer feels controlled by external reactions. Another important realization is that attention does not always reflect genuine care. Sometimes people give attention out of habit, curiosity, or convenience. Sometimes attention is temporary. When circumstances change, attention also changes. If emotional stability depends only on external focus, the mind will constantly feel uncertain. Peace creates a deeper form of security. It creates a feeling of stability that does not fluctuate according to social interaction. A peaceful person does not feel empty when they are not being observed. They do not feel anxious when conversations slow down. They do not feel invisible when attention shifts elsewhere. Their sense of worth remains stable because it is not built on external observation. Buddhist teachings often encourage turning inward rather than constantly seeking outward validation. When the mind turns inward, it begins to understand itself better. It begins to recognize unnecessary emotional patterns. It begins to release the habit of constantly seeking reassurance. This awareness gradually reduces the need for external attention. As a person practices seeking peace instead of attention, they begin to experience a quiet confidence. They feel comfortable expressing themselves without needing applause. They feel satisfied with their progress even when no one is watching. They feel stable even when others are busy with their own lives. This confidence does not create arrogance, it creates calmness. Relationships also become healthier when attention is no longer the main expectation. Interactions feel lighter. Communication feels genuine rather than pressured. Appreciation feels natural rather than demanded. A person who does not constantly seek attention allows others to interact freely. This creates mutual respect because the connection is not based on emotional pressure. Peace allows a person to observe life more clearly. Instead of constantly wondering who is noticing them, they begin to notice their own thoughts. Instead of worrying about how they appear, they begin to focus on how they feel. Instead of trying to maintain constant relevance, they begin to appreciate simple moments. Gradually, the mind realizes that peace provides a deeper satisfaction than attention ever could. Attention excites the mind temporarily, but peace nourishes the mind continuously. Attention creates stimulation, but peace creates stability. Attention depends on circumstances, but peace grows through understanding. When you seek peace instead of attention, you begin to feel emotionally free. You no longer feel controlled by how often someone responds. You no longer feel disturbed when others are focused on their own responsibilities. You no longer feel restless when there is no external stimulation. Instead, you feel grounded in your own presence. True emotional strength develops when peace becomes more important than recognition, because recognition can be taken away, but peace can be cultivated internally. Recognition may fluctuate, but peace can remain steady. Recognition may depend on others, but peace depends on awareness. When the desire for constant attention becomes weaker, the mind becomes quieter. When the mind becomes quieter, understanding becomes deeper. And when understanding becomes deeper, lasting happiness becomes possible. 5. Accept impermanence and release inner resistance. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism is the understanding that everything in life is impermanent. Nothing remains exactly the same forever. Situations change, emotions change, people change, relationships change, and even the way we think changes over time. Life is constantly moving, constantly evolving, constantly transforming. Yet much of human suffering comes from the desire to hold everything in a fixed form. The mind wants stability in a world that is naturally unstable. It wants certainty in a reality that is always shifting. Many people suffer not because change is happening, but because they resist change. They want things to remain the way they once were. They want people to behave the way they behaved in the past. They want situations to continue providing the same comfort they once provided. When life moves in a different direction, the mind begins to feel disturbed. It starts asking questions that create emotional tension. Why did this change? Why did this person become different? Why does life not feel the same anymore? The problem is not that change exists. The problem is that the mind tries to stop change. It tries to hold on to moments that were never meant to remain permanent. It tries to preserve situations that naturally evolve with time. This resistance creates inner conflict. The heart feels heavy because reality is moving forward while the mind is trying to stay in the past. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering increases when we expect permanence from temporary things. Everything in life has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every situation moves through different stages. Every emotion rises and fades. Every relationship experiences phases of closeness and distance. Nothing remains frozen in one condition forever. When we forget this truth, we begin to build expectations that reality cannot fulfill. For example, when a person experiences happiness through a relationship, they may begin to believe that this feeling will remain exactly the same forever. They may expect the same level of attention, the same level of understanding, the same level of emotional connection at all times, but life introduces changes. Responsibilities increase, circumstances shift. Priorities evolve. When these natural changes occur, the mind may interpret them as loss, even when nothing has actually been taken away. Resistance to change creates emotional pressure. The mind begins to compare the present with the past. It begins to replay memories of how things used to feel. It begins to feel dissatisfied because reality is no longer matching previous expectations. This comparison increases restlessness. Instead of accepting the present moment, the mind continues to argue with reality. Acceptance does not mean giving up or becoming passive. Acceptance means understanding that change is a natural part of existence. Acceptance means recognizing that life cannot remain static. Acceptance means allowing reality to move without constantly resisting its direction. When acceptance increases, inner resistance begins to decrease. When resistance decreases, emotional suffering becomes lighter. Buddhism encourages observing change rather than fearing it. When we observe how everything evolves, we begin to realize that change is not always negative. Sometimes change removes situations that were limiting growth. Sometimes change creates opportunities for deeper understanding. Sometimes change allows emotional strength to develop. Sometimes change opens the path toward new experiences that were previously hidden. Inner resistance often comes from the desire for control. The mind wants to predict outcomes. It wants to ensure comfort. It wants to prevent uncertainty. But complete control over life is not possible. There will always be elements that remain unpredictable. When we try to control everything, the mind becomes tense. It constantly scans for potential problems. It constantly worries about possible changes. This constant tension prevents relaxation. When a person accepts impermanence, they stop expecting life to remain unchanged. They stop assuming that every moment must feel familiar. They begin to allow experiences to come and go naturally. Instead of holding tightly to every situation, they allow situations to flow. This creates emotional flexibility. Emotional flexibility allows the mind to adapt rather than resist. Adapting to change does not weaken a person, it strengthens them. A flexible mind can remain stable even when circumstances shift. A rigid mind becomes disturbed whenever reality moves in an unexpected direction. The more rigid the expectations, the greater the frustration when life does not follow the imagined plan. Many people feel unhappy because they try to recreate past experiences that can no longer exist in the same way. They try to bring back emotions that belong to a different time. They try to hold on to connections that have naturally evolved. This effort creates emotional exhaustion. The mind continues searching for something that reality has already changed. Acceptance allows the mind to release this struggle. Instead of trying to force life into a fixed shape, a person begins to appreciate each moment as it is. They stop demanding that everything must feel the same. They begin to understand that change does not always remove happiness. Sometimes, change reveals new forms of peace. Buddhist wisdom also teaches that even difficult emotions are impermanent. Sadness does not remain forever. Anxiety does not remain forever. Loneliness does not remain forever. Every emotional state eventually changes. When we remember this truth, we stop believing that discomfort will last permanently. We begin to see emotional pain as temporary movement rather than permanent reality. Inner resistance often increases emotional suffering because the mind fights against the experience. Instead of allowing the emotion to pass naturally, the mind keeps analyzing it, questioning it, and magnifying it. This creates a cycle where discomfort feels heavier than it actually is. Acceptance breaks this cycle. When the mind allows emotions to appear and disappear without resistance, emotional intensity gradually decreases. Impermanence also teaches gratitude. When we understand that nothing remains forever, we begin to appreciate moments more deeply. We appreciate calm periods because we understand they may change. We appreciate supportive people because we understand circumstances evolve. We appreciate peaceful experiences because we recognize their temporary nature. Gratitude creates contentment. Contentment reduces restlessness. When a person becomes content with the present moment, they stop constantly searching for a different version of reality. They stop comparing every experience with an imagined ideal. They begin to feel peaceful with what exists now. Releasing inner resistance also helps reduce fear of the future. Many fears come from imagining negative changes. The mind creates stories about what might happen. It imagines loss, uncertainty, or discomfort. But when we understand that change is constant, we stop expecting permanent security from temporary situations. Instead, we begin to trust our ability to adapt. Trusting your ability to adapt creates confidence. Confidence reduces anxiety. Anxiety decreases when the mind understands that it can adjust to changing conditions. Instead of fearing every shift, the mind begins to accept movement as part of life's rhythm. Buddhist teachings remind us that clinging tightly to anything creates tension. The tighter we hold, the more pressure we feel. When we loosen our grip, the mind relaxes. This relaxation allows peace to grow naturally. Peace does not come from controlling life. Peace comes from understanding life. Accepting impermanence does not remove love, connection, or meaning. Instead, it makes these experiences more genuine. When we understand that moments are temporary, we appreciate them more sincerely. We become more present. We become more attentive. We become more aware of the value of each experience. When resistance disappears, the mind stops fighting reality. When the mind stops fighting reality, it stops creating unnecessary suffering. When suffering decreases, emotional clarity increases. And when clarity increases, happiness becomes easier to experience. Impermanence reminds us that difficult moments will pass. It reminds us that peaceful moments should be appreciated. It reminds us that nothing remains fixed, including emotional discomfort. This understanding reduces fear of change. It creates openness toward life's natural movement. As acceptance becomes stronger, emotional pressure becomes lighter. The mind stops demanding that everything must remain predictable. It stops believing that happiness depends on stability of external conditions. It begins to understand that stability can exist internally, even when life changes externally. When you accept impermanence, you stop expecting life to remain perfect. You begin allowing life to unfold naturally. You begin trusting that change can bring growth. You begin recognizing that peace does not require permanent circumstances. Peace requires flexible understanding. Releasing inner resistance allows emotional energy to flow more freely. Instead of being trapped in frustration, the mind becomes open. Instead of being stuck in comparison, the mind becomes present. Instead of being overwhelmed by change, the mind becomes balanced. True peace begins when we stop asking life to remain the same. True peace begins when we accept that change is part of existence. True peace begins when we understand that stability can be created within, even when everything outside continues to move. 6. Use solitude to develop inner strength. Many people misunderstand solitude. They see it as emptiness, isolation, or something to escape from as quickly as possible. They assume that being alone automatically means being unhappy. Because of this belief, they constantly try to surround themselves with noise, activity, and social interaction, even when their mind is exhausted. They fear silence because silence forces them to face their own thoughts. They fear being alone because they believe their strength depends on having constant emotional support. But Buddhist wisdom teaches something very different. It teaches that solitude is not a punishment. Solitude is an opportunity. It is a powerful space where the mind can recover from the noise of the world. It is a condition where self-awareness becomes stronger. It is an environment where emotional clarity can grow naturally. When a person learns to use solitude wisely, it becomes one of the greatest sources of inner strength. When we are constantly surrounded by distractions, it becomes difficult to observe our own mind. External noise keeps attention focused outward. We become busy reacting to situations, responding to messages, managing expectations, and adjusting to social pressures. Because the mind is always engaged externally, there is very little time to understand what is happening internally. Many people live for years without truly knowing their own emotional patterns because they rarely spend time in silence. Solitude creates space for awareness. In quiet moments, thoughts become more visible. Emotional patterns become easier to recognize. A person begins to notice how certain memories create tension. They begin to observe how certain worries repeat again and again. They begin to understand how certain expectations create pressure. This awareness is extremely valuable because understanding is the first step toward transformation. Inner strength does not develop only through external success. Inner strength develops through self-understanding. When a person understands their fears, they become less controlled by them. When a person understands their emotional triggers, they become less reactive. When a person understands their mental habits, they gain the ability to change them. Solitude creates the environment where this understanding becomes possible. Many people try to escape difficult emotions by constantly staying busy. They fill every moment with activity so that they do not have to think deeply. But avoidance does not remove emotional difficulty. It only delays it. The mind continues carrying unresolved tension, even when distractions temporarily hide it. Solitude allows these emotions to surface gently, giving a person the opportunity to observe them calmly instead of suppressing them. Buddhism encourages observing the mind without judgment. Instead of labeling thoughts as good or bad, a person simply becomes aware of them. They notice which thoughts create anxiety. They notice which thoughts create peace. They notice how the mind sometimes creates unnecessary worries about the future. This observation gradually reduces the power of negative thinking because awareness weakens unconscious patterns. Solitude also creates independence. When a person spends time alone without feeling uncomfortable, they begin to realize that their emotional stability does not depend on constant company. They begin to trust their own ability to remain calm without needing reassurance from others. This trust creates confidence. Confidence creates resilience. Resilience creates strength. Inner strength means being able to remain stable even when external support is limited. It means being able to make decisions without constant approval. It means being able to face challenges without feeling overwhelmed. Solitude helps develop these qualities because it encourages self-reliance. A person learns to think clearly without being influenced by every external opinion. They learn to listen to their inner wisdom instead of constantly seeking direction from others. Many of the most important realizations in life appear during quiet moments. When the mind is not overwhelmed by external stimulation, deeper insights become visible. A person begins to understand what truly matters and what does not. They begin to recognize which worries are unnecessary. They begin to see which habits disturb their peace. This clarity helps them make better choices. Solitude also strengthens emotional discipline. Without constant distraction, a person learns to sit with their thoughts patiently. They learn to observe discomfort without immediately reacting. They learn to allow emotions to rise and fall naturally. This practice increases tolerance for uncertainty. It reduces impulsive reactions. It increases emotional balance. People who are not comfortable with solitude often become dependent on external reassurance. They feel restless when they are not receiving attention. They feel anxious when there is silence. They feel uneasy when they do not have someone to talk to constantly. But when a person develops comfort in solitude, they no longer feel controlled by these needs. They begin to feel stable, even when communication is limited. Solitude also allows personal growth without comparison. When constantly surrounded by others, the mind often begins to compare progress. It compares achievements, lifestyle, appearance, and success. Comparison often creates dissatisfaction because the mind focuses on what seems missing rather than appreciating what exists. Solitude reduces this comparison because attention turns inward. A person begins focusing on their own development instead of measuring themselves against others. Growth becomes more meaningful when it is not driven by competition. It becomes more sincere when it is guided by understanding rather than pressure. Solitude provides the calm environment where personal improvement becomes natural. A person begins reading, reflecting, learning, and improving because they genuinely want to grow, not because they want to impress others. Another benefit of solitude is mental recovery. Continuous social interaction can sometimes exhaust the mind, even when the interaction is positive. Constant conversation requires emotional energy. Constant responsiveness requires attention. Constant stimulation can overwhelm the senses. Solitude allows the nervous system to relax. It allows thoughts to slow down. It allows the mind to rest from constant input. When the mind is rested, clarity increases. Decision-making becomes easier. Emotional reactions become calmer. Small problems feel less overwhelming. This mental clarity strengthens confidence because a person feels more capable of handling challenges. Buddhist teachings often emphasize the importance of mindfulness, which becomes easier in solitude. Mindfulness means being fully present in the moment. When external noise is reduced, attention naturally becomes more focused. A person begins noticing small details that were previously ignored. They become aware of their breathing, their surroundings, their sensations, and their thoughts. This awareness increases calmness because the mind stops constantly rushing between past and future concerns. Solitude also allows a person to reconnect with their values. When constantly influenced by others, it can be difficult to distinguish between personal desires and social expectations. A person may follow certain paths simply because others expect it. They may pursue certain goals simply because they feel pressure to do so. Solitude provides space to question these influences. A person begins to ask themselves what truly matters to them. This questioning leads to authenticity. Authenticity creates confidence because actions become aligned with personal values. When actions reflect true understanding, regret decreases. When regret decreases, peace increases. Using solitude wisely does not mean isolating yourself completely from the world. It means creating moments where the mind can breathe freely without constant external demand. It means allowing time for reflection instead of constant reaction. It means giving yourself the opportunity to understand your inner world. Inner strength grows gradually. It does not appear instantly. It develops through repeated moments of awareness, patience, and reflection. Each quiet moment becomes a small step toward emotional stability. Each moment of self-understanding becomes a foundation for resilience. When a person becomes comfortable with solitude, they stop fearing loneliness. Instead of feeling empty when alone, they begin to feel grounded. Instead of feeling abandoned, they begin to feel independent. Instead of feeling restless, they begin to feel peaceful. This transformation changes how a person interacts with the world. They no longer seek relationships only to avoid loneliness. They no longer seek attention only to feel valuable. They no longer fear silence because silence becomes a source of strength. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that a calm mind is a powerful mind, and a powerful mind is often developed in quiet environments. Solitude becomes a teacher that reveals truths that noise often hides. It becomes a space where emotional wounds can heal gradually. It becomes an environment where confidence grows without external pressure. When solitude is used wisely, it does not create weakness. It creates resilience. It creates independence. It creates clarity. It creates stability. And this stability allows a person to remain peaceful even when life becomes uncertain. A person who has developed inner strength through solitude does not feel lost when external support is unavailable. They do not feel broken when situations become difficult. They do not feel empty when they are alone. Instead, they feel centered. They feel capable. They feel balanced. Solitude, when understood correctly, becomes a path toward emotional freedom. It becomes a quiet journey where a person gradually discovers that their strength was never dependent on constant company. Their strength was always within them, waiting to be recognized through awareness, patience, and understanding. 7. Reduce expectations to reduce suffering. One of the deepest reasons behind emotional pain is expectation. Expectations are often silent, but they strongly influence how we feel. Many people do not realize how much suffering comes from expecting life, people, and situations to behave in specific ways. The mind quietly creates images of how things should happen. It creates ideas about how people should treat us, how relationships should feel, how quickly results should appear, and how life should unfold. When reality does not match these expectations, disappointment appears. Expectation is not always wrong, but unconscious expectation creates emotional pressure. A person may expect others to always understand their feelings without needing explanation. They may expect others to respond with the same level of care that they give. They may expect people to always behave consistently. They may expect life to move smoothly without unexpected difficulties. When these expectations are not fulfilled, the mind feels hurt, even when no one intended harm. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to expectations is one of the main causes of suffering. When we expect too much from people, we unknowingly place emotional responsibility on them. We begin to depend on their behavior for our peace. If they act according to our expectations, we feel calm. If they act differently, we feel disturbed. This creates emotional instability because other people's behavior is never fully within our control. Many expectations are formed based on past experiences. When something good happens, the mind begins to assume that the same experience will repeat in the future. When someone shows kindness once, we begin to expect the same response every time. When someone gives attention regularly, we begin to expect constant communication. But life does not always move in predictable patterns. Circumstances change. People become busy. Situations evolve. When change occurs, expectations often remain fixed, creating tension between imagination and reality. The mind often interprets unmet expectations as rejection or neglect. A delayed response may feel like lack of care. A difference in opinion may feel like lack of understanding. A change in behavior may feel like loss of value. But many times, these interpretations are created by the mind rather than reality itself. The mind begins to create stories about what the situation means, and these stories increase emotional discomfort. Reducing expectations does not mean becoming negative or hopeless. It means becoming realistic and flexible. It means understanding that people cannot always meet every emotional need. It means recognizing that life does not always follow a perfect plan. It means allowing situations to unfold naturally without constantly demanding specific outcomes. When expectations are reduced, emotional pressure becomes lighter. The mind stops constantly waiting for things to happen in a particular way. Instead of feeling disappointed when reality is different, the mind becomes open to different possibilities. Openness creates calmness because the mind is no longer constantly comparing reality with imagined outcomes. Many people suffer not because situations are truly painful, but because the mind keeps insisting that things should be different. This insistence creates resistance. Resistance creates frustration. Frustration creates emotional fatigue. When expectations decrease, resistance also decreases. When resistance decreases, emotional balance becomes easier. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace increases when we release the habit of demanding certainty from uncertain situations. Life contains many unpredictable elements. People have their own struggles that we may not always see. Situations may develop in ways we did not anticipate. When we accept this uncertainty, we stop expecting life to always follow our personal timeline. Expectations also create pressure in relationships. When a person expects constant attention, constant agreement, constant emotional support, the relationship begins to feel heavy. The other person may feel unable to meet these expectations, which creates distance. When expectations are lighter, relationships feel more natural. Communication becomes easier because there is less pressure to perform perfectly. Reducing expectations allows appreciation to grow. When we stop expecting constant perfection, we begin to notice small, positive moments. We begin to feel grateful for simple gestures. We begin to recognize effort instead of focusing only on what is missing. Gratitude creates satisfaction because the mind shifts its attention toward what exists instead of constantly focusing on what is absent. Expectations often come from the belief that external conditions must be perfect for us to feel happy. We may believe that happiness will come when people behave in certain ways, when situations improve, or when circumstances become ideal. But waiting for perfect conditions delays happiness. Perfection is rarely permanent. Even when situations improve, new challenges appear. Buddhist teachings encourage finding peace in the present moment rather than waiting for ideal outcomes. When expectations are reduced, the mind becomes more present. It stops constantly projecting into the future. It stops constantly comparing with the past. It begins to observe what is happening now. Presence creates calmness because the mind is no longer overwhelmed by imagined scenarios. Many expectations are created by social influence. Society often promotes the idea that life must follow certain patterns. It suggests how relationships should look, how success should appear, how happiness should feel. When personal experience does not match these patterns, the mind begins to feel inadequate. But these external standards are not universal truths. Each person's journey is different. Reducing expectations allows individuality. A person begins to accept their unique pace of growth. They begin to accept that their path may look different from others. This acceptance reduces unnecessary comparison. When comparison decreases, dissatisfaction also decreases. The mind becomes more peaceful because it is no longer trying to compete with unrealistic standards. Expectations also increase overthinking. The mind keeps imagining possible outcomes. It keeps predicting reactions. It keeps analyzing whether expectations will be fulfilled. This constant mental activity creates fatigue. When expectations are reduced, mental activity becomes quieter. The mind becomes less concerned with controlling outcomes and more focused on understanding experiences. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment to outcomes creates anxiety. When we become too focused on how things must happen, we lose the ability to appreciate how things are happening. Anxiety increases because the mind fears that outcomes may not match expectations. But when we release attachment to specific results, anxiety decreases. The mind becomes more relaxed because it no longer feels responsible for controlling every detail. Reducing expectations also strengthens emotional independence. When we expect less from others, we begin to rely more on our own stability. We stop expecting others to constantly solve our emotional discomfort. We begin to develop the ability to calm ourselves. This self-reliance creates confidence because we feel capable of managing our emotions. Emotional independence does not mean rejecting connection. It means building stability that does not collapse when external support is limited. It means appreciating relationships without depending completely on them for happiness. It means maintaining balance even when situations change. Another benefit of reducing expectations is increased patience. When we stop expecting immediate results, we allow time for natural development. Growth often takes longer than the mind anticipates. Healing requires patience. Understanding requires patience. Progress requires patience. Expectations often create urgency that leads to frustration. Patience creates calm progress. Buddhist teachings often encourage observing expectations carefully. Many expectations operate unconsciously. A person may not realize how many conditions they are placing on happiness. They may believe they can only feel peaceful if certain things happen first. But when we observe these conditions, we realize that many of them are unnecessary. Happiness does not require perfect timing. Peace does not require perfect understanding. Stability does not require perfect agreement. Many forms of emotional suffering come from believing that happiness must wait for ideal circumstances. When expectations decrease, acceptance increases. Acceptance creates mental space. Mental space allows emotional recovery. Instead of constantly reacting to unmet expectations, the mind becomes more balanced. Balanced thinking creates emotional strength. Reducing expectations also helps a person respond to life more calmly. Instead of reacting strongly when situations change, they adjust gradually. Instead of feeling shocked when people behave differently, they understand that variation is natural. Instead of feeling disappointed when outcomes differ from plans, they adapt with flexibility. Flexibility creates resilience. A resilient mind can handle uncertainty more effectively. It can remain peaceful even when conditions are not ideal. It can maintain stability even when situations are unpredictable. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace does not come from controlling every external detail. Peace comes from understanding how the mind reacts to these details. When expectations are reduced, reactions become softer. When reactions become softer, emotional suffering becomes lighter. Gradually, the mind learns that happiness is not dependent on perfect behavior from others. It learns that peace does not require constant agreement. It learns that emotional stability does not require predictable outcomes. This learning creates freedom because happiness becomes less fragile. When expectations become balanced, relationships improve. Conversations become more relaxed. Differences in opinion feel less threatening. Changes in behavior feel less disturbing. A person becomes more understanding because they no longer expect perfection. Reducing expectations does not mean lowering standards for personal growth. It means removing unnecessary pressure from situations that cannot always be controlled. It means accepting reality without constantly demanding that it must match imagination. As expectations become lighter, the heart becomes lighter, emotional tension decreases, overthinking reduces, frustration becomes less frequent, calmness becomes more natural. Buddhist teachings remind us that suffering often increases when we insist that life must happen exactly as we imagine. But peace begins when we allow life to unfold naturally. Peace grows when we accept that not everything will match our expectations. When expectations are reduced, we begin to experience more gratitude, more patience, more understanding, and more stability. Instead of constantly waiting for ideal outcomes, we begin to appreciate present experiences. Instead of constantly feeling disappointed, we begin to feel content. True emotional freedom begins when happiness no longer depends on how perfectly life meets our expectations. True peace begins when we understand that life does not need to be perfect for the mind to be calm. 8. Happiness exists within you. The greatest realization a person can reach is understanding that happiness is not something that comes from outside. It is not something that other people can permanently give, and it is not something that circumstances can guarantee forever. Happiness exists within the mind, within awareness, within the way we understand life. Yet many people spend years searching for happiness in external places. They believe happiness will appear when certain conditions are fulfilled. They believe happiness will come when they meet the right people, when situations become comfortable, when life becomes easier, or when everything finally goes according to plan. But life rarely remains perfect for long. Situations improve and then change again. People enter our lives and sometimes leave. Success appears, and later new challenges arise. If happiness depends only on external conditions, it will always feel uncertain. The mind will always worry that something might disturb the peace. This creates emotional instability because external conditions are constantly moving. Buddhist wisdom teaches that lasting happiness is not created by controlling everything outside. It is created by understanding everything inside. The mind is the place where happiness is experienced. The same situation can create different emotions in different people because interpretation shapes feeling. When the mind interprets events with fear, worry increases. When the mind interprets events with understanding, calmness increases. This shows that happiness is not only determined by circumstances, it is strongly influenced by perspective. Many people delay happiness because they believe they must achieve something first. They think they must solve every problem, remove every difficulty, or create perfect conditions before they can feel peaceful. This belief creates constant postponement of contentment. The mind continues to search for future situations that promise happiness. But when those situations arrive, new desires appear. This cycle continues endlessly, keeping happiness always slightly out of reach. When a person begins to understand that happiness can exist even in imperfect conditions, a shift occurs. The mind stops constantly chasing external completion. It begins to discover satisfaction in the present moment. It begins to notice that peace can exist even when everything is not ideal. It begins to understand that emotional balance does not require perfect circumstances. Happiness within does not mean constant excitement or constant pleasure. It means a quiet sense of stability. It means feeling emotionally balanced, even when situations are uncertain. It means feeling calm without needing constant reassurance. This type of happiness is gentle but strong. It does not depend on temporary stimulation. It grows from clarity and understanding. One reason people struggle to feel happiness within is because their attention is always directed outward. They constantly observe what others are doing, what others are achieving, what others are experiencing. This comparison creates dissatisfaction because the mind begins to believe that happiness exists somewhere else. It begins to believe that others are more fulfilled. This belief creates restlessness because the mind starts chasing images of happiness rather than experiencing peace in the present. Buddhist teachings encourage turning attention inward. When attention moves inward, awareness increases. A person begins to notice their own thoughts more clearly. They begin to recognize how certain thinking patterns create unnecessary stress. They begin to see how constant comparison creates dissatisfaction. This awareness allows them to gradually release these patterns. Happiness within grows when the mind becomes less dependent on external approval. When a person stops measuring their value based on how others respond, emotional independence increases. They no longer feel empty when attention decreases. They no longer feel incomplete when they are alone. They begin to feel grounded because their sense of worth does not fluctuate with external reactions. Self-connection plays an important role in discovering happiness within. Many people feel disconnected from themselves because they spend little time observing their own mind. They may know the preferences of others better than they know their own emotional needs. They may understand external expectations more than they understand their own inner state. When a person reconnects with themselves, they begin to feel more stable. Reconnecting with yourself means observing your thoughts without immediately reacting to them. It means recognizing emotional patterns without judging yourself harshly. It means allowing yourself to exist without constant pressure to perform. This creates psychological safety. When the mind feels safe, it becomes easier to feel peaceful. Another important aspect of internal happiness is acceptance. Acceptance allows a person to acknowledge their current reality without constant resistance. Many people create suffering by repeatedly thinking that life should be different. They feel frustrated that certain problems exist. They feel dissatisfied that certain situations are not ideal. This resistance keeps the mind in conflict with reality. When acceptance increases, mental conflict decreases. Acceptance does not mean giving up improvement. It means allowing the present moment to exist without constant argument. It means understanding that not everything must change immediately for peace to exist. Peace can exist even while improvement is still in progress. Buddhist wisdom often reminds us that the mind itself can become a source of suffering when it constantly searches for something missing. The mind keeps asking what else is needed before happiness can begin. It keeps imagining better circumstances, but when the mind pauses this search, it begins to notice that some form of calmness already exists. This calmness may be subtle, but it is present. Gratitude strengthens internal happiness. When a person focuses only on what is missing, dissatisfaction increases. When a person notices what is present, appreciation grows. Appreciation creates contentment because the mind begins to recognize that not everything is lacking. Even small moments of peace become meaningful when attention is directed toward them. Happiness within also grows when we reduce dependence on constant stimulation. Many people seek continuous entertainment, continuous conversation, and continuous distraction because they fear feeling bored or uncomfortable. But constant stimulation often prevents deeper calmness from developing. The mind becomes used to excitement and struggles to relax in stillness. Stillness allows emotional recovery. It allows mental clarity to increase. It allows awareness to deepen. In stillness, a person begins to notice that peace does not require constant activity. Peace can exist quietly. It does not need to be dramatic or intense. Self-understanding also increases internal happiness. When a person understands their values, their priorities, and their intentions, confusion decreases. They stop trying to live according to every external expectation. They begin to live according to what genuinely feels meaningful. This alignment creates satisfaction because actions feel authentic rather than forced. Buddhist teachings often emphasize that happiness grows when attachment to temporary conditions becomes balanced. External experiences can provide enjoyment, but they cannot provide permanent fulfillment. When we expect temporary experiences to create permanent satisfaction, disappointment becomes inevitable. But when we enjoy experiences without clinging to them, appreciation becomes easier. Internal happiness creates emotional freedom. When happiness depends less on external validation, the mind becomes more stable. A person feels peaceful even when recognition is limited. They feel content even when circumstances are simple. They feel calm even when life is not perfect. This freedom changes the way a person experiences solitude. Instead of feeling lonely, they begin to feel independent. Instead of feeling abandoned, they begin to feel self-sufficient. Instead of feeling empty, they begin to feel spacious. Their inner world becomes supportive rather than uncomfortable. Internal happiness also improves relationships because connection is no longer driven by fear of loneliness. A person who feels complete within does not attach to others out of emotional desperation. They connect out of sincerity. They appreciate others without depending entirely on them for emotional stability. This creates healthier bonds because expectations become lighter. Happiness within also strengthens resilience. When difficulties appear, the mind does not collapse immediately. It remains balanced because peace does not depend entirely on external comfort. Challenges may create temporary discomfort, but they do not destroy emotional stability completely. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the mind has the ability to cultivate peace gradually. Peace is not forced. It develops through awareness, patience, and understanding. Each moment of mindfulness strengthens internal stability. Each moment of acceptance reduces unnecessary tension. Each moment of gratitude increases contentment. When the mind stops constantly searching for happiness outside, it begins to recognize the calmness that already exists inside. This calmness may not be dramatic, but it is steady. It does not fluctuate dramatically with every external change. It provides a quiet sense of security. Happiness within does not remove every difficulty from life. Difficult moments still occur. Uncertainty still exists. Challenges still appear. But internal stability changes how these experiences are felt. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, the mind responds with patience. Instead of feeling hopeless, the mind looks for understanding. Instead of feeling broken, the mind adapts gradually. The realization that happiness exists within creates deep confidence. It allows a person to trust their own ability to remain balanced, even when life becomes unpredictable. It reduces fear of losing external comfort, because the mind knows that peace is not completely dependent on external conditions. This realization does not appear instantly. It develops gradually as awareness increases. Each moment of self-understanding strengthens this realization. Each moment of calm reflection reinforces internal stability. Over time, happiness becomes less dependent on circumstances and more connected to understanding. When happiness exists within, loneliness loses its intensity. Being alone does not automatically create sadness. Silence does not automatically create discomfort. Instead, solitude becomes an opportunity to experience calmness without distraction. Buddhist teachings remind us that peace grows when the mind stops searching desperately for fulfillment outside. Fulfillment becomes visible when attention turns inward. The mind begins to realize that emotional stability can exist even without perfect conditions. Happiness within is not loud, but it is powerful. It does not require constant recognition. It does not require constant stimulation. It grows quietly through awareness. It becomes stable through acceptance. It becomes strong through understanding. When a person realizes that happiness exists within, they stop feeling controlled by changing circumstances. They begin to feel free because their emotional balance is no longer fragile. They become capable of experiencing peace even when life becomes uncertain. True happiness begins when the mind understands that nothing external needs to be perfect for inner calm to exist. Peace becomes possible even in simple moments. Contentment becomes possible even in quiet environments. Stability becomes possible even when life is not completely predictable. Happiness within becomes a steady companion. It does not disappear easily because it is not dependent on temporary situations. It remains present through awareness, through patience, and through understanding. And when this understanding becomes clear, a person realizes that they were never truly empty. They were simply searching in the wrong direction. Being alone is not a punishment from life. Sometimes it is life's way of guiding you back to yourself, back to the place where your peace does not depend on anyone's presence, back to the place where your happiness is not controlled by changing situations, back to the place where your heart becomes calm without needing constant reassurance. Many people spend years searching for happiness in the outside world, only to feel disappointed again and again. They keep hoping that someone else will complete them, understand them perfectly, or remove every feeling of loneliness. But the deeper truth is this: no one can give you permanent peace if you have not discovered peace within yourself. When you learn to be happy alone, you stop fearing silence. You stop fearing distance. You stop fearing change, because your stability is no longer built on temporary things. It is built on understanding. It is built on awareness. It is built on inner strength. The strongest people are not those who always have support. The strongest people are those who remain emotionally balanced, even when life becomes quiet. Because they have discovered something very powerful. Their happiness does not depend on who stays or who leaves. Their peace does not depend on constant attention. Their emotional stability does not depend on external validation. They carry their calmness within them. When you reach this stage, relationships become healthier, not heavier. You appreciate people, but you do not depend completely on them. You care for others, but you do not lose yourself. You connect with sincerity, not fear. You give love, but you do not beg for emotional security, because you have already found something deeper. You have found peace within yourself. Always remember, solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is space. Space to understand yourself. Space to strengthen your mind. Space to build a happiness that cannot easily be taken away. Life becomes easier when your peace is not constantly shaken by people's behavior. Life becomes calmer when your happiness is not dependent on external approval. Life becomes lighter when you stop searching outside for what already exists inside. Walk your path with quiet confidence. Trust your journey, even when it feels lonely. Trust your growth, even when it happens slowly. Trust your inner strength, even when no one sees it. Because the moment you learn to be happy alone, you become free. Free from fear of losing people. Free from emotional instability. Free from constant disappointment. And in that freedom, you discover the deepest form of peace.